Effective immediately, you're no longer CEO. At a glittering anniversary gala, moments after he publicly humiliated his own wife and flaunted his mistress, the most powerful man in the room stood up, calm, composed, and devastating. One sentence, one shift of power, and the empire he thought he controlled began to collapse in front of everyone. You won't believe how the night ends. Before we begin, take a quick moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful stories, and subscribe to this channel. Your support truly helps us grow and keeps these intense, unforgettable stories coming your way. Now, let's begin. The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, each crystal prism reflecting hundreds of points of light across the polished marble floor. Soft classical music flowed in the background, though the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation rather than serenity. Every table was adorned with white linen, delicate rose arrangements, and flickering candles, while the scent of fresh jasmine and subtle perfume intertwined with the faint aroma of gourmet hors d'oeuvres. Amara moved through the room with a careful composure, her heels clicking lightly against the floor. She was breathtaking, slim, elegant, draped in a flowing champagne-colored dress that caught the light in a way that made her glow. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, her heart thudded unevenly, a rhythm that no amount of mascara or careful posture could mask. This was supposed to be a celebration, a decade of marriage, a life built together, but an inexplicable tension hung over the room. She adjusted a napkin on one of the tables, a small gesture of control. She had arranged everything herself, from the delicate pastries on the dessert table to the arrangement of flowers in the centerpieces. Every detail mattered. Every smile and glance that night was meant to reflect her love, her devotion, her patience over 10 long years. But she had noticed it weeks ago in small things, in the air. Delayed replies, odd silences, faint traces of unfamiliar perfume on his coat. Tonight, though, she ignored it, telling herself that sometimes a person was simply tired or distracted. Guests began arriving, their chatter filling the room with polite excitement. Close friends, business associates, family members all murmured their congratulations and admiration for the couple. Amara greeted each with warmth, her smile immaculate. She caught sight of him, her husband, Adrian, across the room, talking with one of his business partners. He was tall, sharply dressed in a tailored black suit, his hand occasionally brushing against the side of a young woman she didn't immediately recognize. There was a strange ease in his posture, a casual confidence that contrasted sharply with her own meticulous precision. And then she saw it, a fleeting glance between them, a smile too intimate, too knowing. Something cold slid into her stomach. Earlier that day, Amara had woken up before dawn, meticulously checking her schedule for the party. She had spent hours at the florist, arranging the roses herself, insisting that each stem be perfectly angled and every leaf flawless. She had chosen her dress with care, a subtle reflection of elegance that spoke of class without ostentation. Meanwhile, Adrian's day had been markedly different. A series of hushed phone calls, private messages that he quickly hid when Amara entered the room, and a lingering aura of detachment defined his morning. At one point, he glanced at his phone, smirked faintly, and slipped out the back door without a word. Later, she would learn he had been meeting with someone, a secret rendezvous with the mistress he had introduced tonight. In the living room, Amara's father had visited briefly, offering her a reassuring nod. "Everything will be perfect, Amara. Don't let nerves ruin the moment," he said gently. His calmness was a shield, an invisible presence she hadn't realized would matter so much tonight. Despite her efforts, a small shadow lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the sensation that something was off, that a plan was unfolding beyond her awareness. She brushed the thought away, telling herself it was irrational. After all, this was her night. She had orchestrated everything to perfection. As guests trickled in, small incidents began to unsettle her further. A perfume she didn't recognize wafted near her husband during a brief interaction. A laugh shared with someone she hadn't met, too intimate, too practiced. The corners of her mind whispered warnings she tried to ignore. Amara, Everything looks incredible, a friend said, breaking her spiraling thoughts. The flowers, the candles, it's like something out of a movie. She smiled faintly. Thank you. I wanted tonight to be special. The friend hesitated, glancing toward Adrian, who was laughing a little too easily with the young woman. She seems close with him. Amara nodded, a faint tremor in her chest. Yes, she is a guest. She didn't add that something about their closeness made her uneasy. But the comment lingered in the air, a subtle accusation that left her heart racing. From across the room, Adrian noticed her pause, his expression unreadable. He gave a small shrug, a gesture of casual dismissal, but the faint curl of a smile hinted at secrets Amara would later discover. The music softened, signaling the start of the official program. Guests gathered near the center of the ballroom, champagne flutes in hand. Amara took her place beside Adrian, her posture straight, her smile unwavering. She could hear her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the anticipation of a night that had been meticulously planned, the culmination of months of preparation. Adrian leaned slightly, murmuring something inaudible to the young woman who lingered at his side. Amara caught only fragments, a whisper of intimacy that made her stomach tighten. The guest list included colleagues and friends from both sides, all unaware of the tension beneath the glitz and glamour. A server moved gracefully among the guests, offering hors d'oeuvres. Amara offered her hand to a longtime family friend, who complimented her on the decorations and her dress. Every word felt like affirmation, but every glance toward her husband drew an invisible line of dread. Adrian, for his part, seemed unconcerned. His charm was effortless, a practiced mask hiding motives Amara could not yet guess. He smiled and laughed, occasionally exchanging a fleeting glance with the mistress that seemed designed to test boundaries. She noticed, but did nothing yet. Finally, the moment came. Amara cleared her throat and stepped forward, the soft click of her heels against the marble drawing attention. She raised her glass, her hands steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her voice calm and clear. 10 years ago, I married a man who promised me partnership, love, and support. Tonight, I celebrate not just the years we've spent together, but the journey, the challenges, and the memories we've built. Her eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on Adrian. She gave a small, heartfelt smile. I am proud of the life we have created, the family and the home we share. And I am grateful to share it with each of you. Applause followed, warm and sincere. Guests clinked glasses, and the soft music resumed in the background. For a fleeting moment, Amara felt the world was exactly as it should be. But then Adrian shifted. He straightened, took the microphone from a server with a sudden decisiveness that silenced the room, and turned toward her. A subtle tremor of anticipation swept through her chest, but she forced a calm facade. Life is too short to stay in unhappy marriages, he began, his tone casual yet deliberate, the kind of statement meant to shock. I deserve passion. I deserve excitement. I deserve to be happy. The room froze. The words hung in the air like ice, sharp and jagged. He reached toward the young woman at his side, taking her hand in his with deliberate care, holding it for all to see. Her eyes widened slightly, but she offered a practiced, serene smile. Amara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed world, the party, the celebration, the gestures of love crumbled in an instant. Guests whispered, faces turning in disbelief, some sympathetic, some shocked, others openly judgmental. In that instant, the room became a theater of betrayal, and Amara stood at its center, frozen yet acutely aware of every heartbeat, every gasped breath, every glittering chandelier above her. It was supposed to be a celebration of love. Instead, it was a stage for humiliation. Adrian's words reverberated across the grand ballroom, each syllable slicing through the soft classical music, silencing the laughter and conversation mid-flow. Life is too short to stay in unhappy marriages. I deserve passion. I deserve excitement. I deserve to be happy. Time seemed to stretch. Guests froze mid-laughter, champagne flutes paused at their lips, and even the chandeliers above seemed to hang in midair, caught in the tension. Amara stood frozen, her heart pounding so violently she could hear it in her ears. Her mind raced, grasping for logic, for understanding, for any explanation that could somehow render this public betrayal less painful. Adrian turned slightly, a deliberate, arrogant tilt of his head, and intertwined his fingers with the young woman's hand at his side. The sight was like fire against her chest. The woman's smile was serene, calm, as if she were the center of a perfectly composed photograph. Guests whispered, some shielding their mouths with polite hands, others gaping openly. A hush spread like a wave across the room. Nobody moved, yet everyone watched. The staff, frozen in mid-step, held trays of hors d'oeuvres uncertainly, unsure whether to continue. A server near the back accidentally dropped a champagne flute, the shattering sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silence, a small punctuation to the shocking moment. Amara's father, seated near the front, did not flinch. He sat with a composed demeanor, observing the spectacle with calm, calculating eyes. The corners of his lips were almost imperceptibly curved, a faint hint that he was aware of more than the others in the room. Even from her frozen spot, Amara sensed it. Adrian, misreading the moment as triumph, released a soft laugh, low and arrogant. "I hope you all understand," he continued, voice dripping with condescension, "that happiness should never be delayed for obligations or expectations. Life is fleeting." He glanced at Amara, as if to underscore that his words were not just a philosophical musing, but a personal declaration, a public slap dressed as enlightenment. Some guests murmured their disapproval. A few friends shifted awkwardly in their seats, uncomfortable at the audacity of such a declaration. Yet the whispers only fueled Adrian's arrogance. He seemed to believe the room was his stage, and that every eye must admire the drama he was producing. Amara's chest tightened. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her, but beneath it, a spark of clarity flickered. This was deliberate, calculated. Every word, every gesture, every glance toward the young woman was meant to wound her publicly. The whispers grew louder, threading through the room like a creeping vine. Some guests offered tentative expressions of sympathy, others exchanged incredulous glances. Social media cameras flickered as a few attendees, unable to resist, began capturing the moment. By the time Adrian finished his little speech, snippets would already be circulating in private groups and chat apps, and he didn't even know it. He continued, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that had shifted irrevocably against him. "We owe it to ourselves to live with passion, to embrace what sets our souls on fire," he said, squeezing the mistress's hand as if to cement their place at the center of the room. "And that's exactly what I intend to do from this moment forward." The young woman smiled, her hand warm in his, radiating a calm satisfaction. She whispered something to him, a low murmur that Amara couldn't hear, but which made him chuckle. That sound, that soft laugh, was a final dagger. Amara's knees felt weak, though she stood upright with perfect poise. Her mind was racing with thoughts, snippets of confrontations she would never have, of words she should have spoken but hadn't. She noticed a few guests glance at her, their eyes sympathetic but awkward, uncertain how to navigate the social disaster unfolding before them. Some avoided her gaze entirely, perhaps too shocked, perhaps too uncomfortable. Her father leaned slightly forward in his seat. Even in the midst of chaos, there was a precision in his movements, a calm observation that seemed almost predatory. He wasn't surprised. He had been waiting. And that knowledge alone gave Amara a thread of hope in the face of absolute public humiliation. Adrian, meanwhile, seemed intoxicated by the attention. He raised his head, chest puffed, as if daring anyone to challenge him. He didn't see the subtle shifts, the way the room's energy had changed, how the whispers had transformed into a tense static, and how a certain, almost imperceptible unease began to ripple through his closest business associates. A few guests, emboldened by shock, attempted to intervene. "Adrian," one whispered cautiously, leaning forward, maybe that's not the right." He waved them off, a dismissive curl of his hand. "I assure you, it is the right time," he interrupted, eyes shining with arrogance, "and I expect everyone to respect my decision." The room remained paralyzed. Even the staff dared not move, unsure whether a sudden gesture would draw his wrath or worsen the tension. Every inch of the grand ballroom was a stage, and Adrian had cast himself as the star, blind to the fact that the narrative was quickly slipping from his control. Unbeknownst to Adrian, every move he had made tonight had been anticipated, meticulously prepared against him. Months earlier, Amara's father had quietly begun observing, subtly monitoring the husband he had once trusted. He had noted the patterns, the secretive calls, the unusual late-night departures. And tonight, as he sat watching the scene unfold, he had already decided the response. No outburst, no confrontation from him, just a quiet, precise intervention that would not only humiliate the husband in return, but also restore dignity to his daughter in the eyes of all present. The subtle flicker of his eyes communicated volumes. Every whispered word, every glance from him was a signal, a prelude to the controlled storm that would be unleashed in just moments. He did not rise yet, but a faint energy radiated from him, so calm yet so unyielding, it was almost imperceptible. Amara noticed it, the calm behind the eyes of the man she had always known as her protector. In that moment, she drew a small, silent breath of relief, a quiet understanding that she was not powerless. This was not the end of the story. The night still held a turn, one she had long been unaware would arrive at the perfect moment. Adrian, oblivious, continued to bask in what he perceived as his triumph. He glanced around, scanning faces for admiration or perhaps envy. He did not see the subtle expressions of concern or judgment forming in the eyes of his business partners, nor did he realize the quiet shift of power that had already begun in the room. Then, as if the room itself had been holding its breath, the father rose. There was no fanfare, no loud declaration, only the subtle, commanding presence that drew attention naturally. Every eye turned toward him, drawn by an invisible force. His steps were measured, deliberate. Yet there was an unmistakable authority in the way he moved, an aura of unspoken control that immediately redirected the tension in the room. Effective immediately, he said calmly, voice clear and unwavering, "You are removed as CEO of the company." A collective gasp rose from the room. The chandeliers seemed to glint sharply, emphasizing the finality of his words. Adrian froze, mid-smile, mid-breath, unable to process what had just been said. His arrogance, once so commanding, crumbled into disbelief. The young woman at his side, the mistress, faltered. She had anticipated being part of the spotlight, the center of a triumphant moment, but this was not what she had expected. Her composure, carefully constructed over weeks of planning, cracked as the weight of reality pressed down on her. Adrian opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. The room's energy shifted entirely. Whispers turned into murmurs of astonishment. Guests who had been shocked for Amara now turned to observe the husband, whose smug confidence had evaporated in a matter of heartbeats. The father's calm gaze swept across the room, briefly meeting Amara's eyes. She nodded ever so slightly, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of support and strategy. In that moment, the humiliation Adrian had so confidently orchestrated began to reverse, the power dynamic flipping with surgical precision. The mistress, sensing the collapse of the narrative she had hoped to share, attempted a smile, but it was brittle, forced, inadequate. She leaned toward Adrian, whispered something, then hesitated. The confidence she had worn like armor all night was gone. Before the dessert was even served, she disappeared. She left quietly, slipping past the guests whose stunned eyes followed her, leaving behind an awkward void. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension shifting entirely. What had been a public humiliation of Amara transformed into a spectacle of the husband's own unraveling. Adrian stood in the center, face pale, hands trembling slightly, unable to comprehend the sudden reversal. The applause that followed Amara's father's declaration was muted, polite, but it carried a weight of recognition. The night had changed, and its moral center had shifted decisively. Amara, though shaken, stood tall. Her father returned to his seat, a quiet satisfaction in his gaze. She breathed, slowly, deliberately, feeling the first real thread of empowerment since the microphone had been grabbed. The room, once dominated by her husband's arrogance, now hummed with whispers and reassessment. Allies and friends began to rally quietly around her, their expressions warm, supportive, and full of unspoken solidarity. For the first time all evening, Amara allowed herself a small, triumphant smile, subtle yet genuine. The story of humiliation, betrayal, and arrogance had taken an unexpected turn, and this was only the beginning. The ballroom, once charged with Adrian's arrogance, now hummed with a different energy. Guests who had moments before been shocked on Amara's behalf now felt a quiet admiration for her composure. She stood with perfect posture, her hands clasped in front of her, her breath steady despite the emotional storm that had just rocked her world. The subtle warmth of support emanated from the small clusters of friends and family around her. She caught the eye of one of her closest friends, a colleague from her charity work, who offered a small, knowing smile. There was no need for words, the understanding was mutual. The display of public humiliation Adrian had attempted had failed spectacularly, and in its place rose a dignity that was unmistakable, magnetic, and powerful. Her father's presence remained steady, a quiet fortress beside her. His gaze swept the room, assessing, calculating. Each glance from him seemed to reassure her without needing any words. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She realized that she had been prepared. The worst, but her father had prepared her for the unexpected. And in that, she found strength. The guests began to murmur, leaning in with polite curiosity, asking small questions to show support. "Amara, are you okay?" a business associate asked softly. She nodded, voice calm, eyes steady. "I am," she said. "Tonight is not about humiliation. It's about clarity." Her words were deliberate, carrying an authority that only comes from surviving a storm without losing oneself. Even the staff, who had frozen in confusion earlier, began to move with renewed confidence. The energy shifted subtly but undeniably. The wife, long perceived as the victim of the evening, was now its quiet victor. As the evening continued, whispers began circulating faster than the clink of glasses. The story of the husband's audacious public confession, followed by his sudden removal, became the invisible center of attention. Conversations flitted from one group to another, each retelling more vivid than the last. By the time dessert was served, the tale had already evolved in the minds of the guests into something almost legendary. Adrian remained frozen, staring at the empty space where his mistress had vanished. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, trying to formulate some explanation, some defense against the turn of events that had caught him entirely off guard. His carefully curated image of dominance had crumbled, replaced by the stark reality of public humiliation. "Did he really just get removed on the spot?" a guest whispered to another, eyes wide. "And the mistress, gone?" Before dessert, Amara's father, seated beside her, only smiled faintly, as if the questions themselves were trivial. The ripple of whispers did not escape him. He had orchestrated the moment precisely, knowing that the true victory would come not from confrontation, but from allowing the room to witness the natural consequences of hubris. Amara noticed the subtle shift in conversations around her. People she had only vaguely known approached with quiet admiration. Colleagues she hadn't interacted with in years offered polite nods and supportive words. Even those who had previously been friendly with Adrian now seemed to observe him with a mix of disbelief and judgment. The social currency of power had shifted without a single raised voice from her. Amara moved quietly to a windowed corner of the room, away from the center of murmurs, but still within view of the guests. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected in the polished glass, casting a warm halo around her. She exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the evening settle. Her mind traced the events like a timeline of betrayal and revelation. She remembered Adrian's smug confidence, the way he had held the mistress's hand for all to see, as if the room itself existed to witness his triumph. She remembered the gasps, the frozen stares, the disbelief etched on familiar faces. And then, the turning point, her father's calm declaration that removed Adrian from his position, shifting the narrative in a single, devastating moment. It was strange, Amara reflected, how quickly power and perception could shift. In one heartbeat, the carefully constructed illusion of dominance was replaced by reality. Adrian had assumed he was the orchestrator, but in truth, he was a character in a story written by someone far more observant and patient. Her gaze drifted to the empty space where the mistress had vanished. A faint smile tugged at her lips. The absence was symbolic, a reminder that arrogance and deceit, no matter how well performed, eventually encounter consequences. A friend approached quietly, leaning in to whisper, "You handled that so gracefully, Amara. I don't know if I could have stayed standing like that." She shook her head, admiration clear. "Truly, you're incredible." Amara's response was simple but layered. Sometimes the quietest presence commands the loudest respect. The words were meant only for her friend, but their resonance lingered in the corner of the room. The energy in the ballroom had shifted entirely. Guests who had been captivated by drama now whispered about the fairness of the turn of events. Colleagues of Adrian's exchanged awkward glances, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and understanding. The narrative had flipped. The wife, once seemingly powerless, now commanded the room with dignity and quiet authority. Adrian's attempts at salvaging his image faltered. He approached a few colleagues, murmuring explanations, but the words fell flat, meaningless against the stark evidence of his miscalculation. The mistress was gone, her absence a constant reminder of her fleeting ambition and lack of foresight. Amara remained poised throughout, occasionally nodding politely to those who approached with sympathy or curiosity. She had mastered the art of remaining visible yet untouchable, of being present without being vulnerable. Every glance, every measured smile, reinforced her authority without requiring confrontation. Her father's presence remained a constant, subtle support. Occasionally, he would offer a brief nod or a soft smile, enough to remind her that she was not alone in navigating the aftermath. The balance of power in the room had shifted irrevocably, and Amara was at the center, not as a victim, but as a survivor and quiet victor. As the evening drew to a close, Amara stepped to the front of the room. The music softened, a gentle, melodic peace filling the space. She raised a glass, not in triumph over anyone, but as a statement of her own clarity and strength. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, voice calm yet resonant. "Tonight has reminded me of something important. Dignity, patience, and self-respect are the true measures of power. Let us celebrate those qualities in ourselves and in one another." The guests raised their glasses, their eyes reflecting genuine admiration. Applause followed, warm and supportive, acknowledging not just the words, but the presence of a woman who had survived a storm of betrayal with grace. Amara looked around the room one last time, absorbing the subtle nods, the quiet respect, the lingering energy of a night that had begun with humiliation and ended with empowerment. She felt a sense of closure, not just in the social sense, but internally. The story of arrogance, betrayal, and manipulation had played out exactly as it needed to. As she descended from the central space, stepping back into the quiet corners of the ballroom, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The evening had transformed her, revealing strengths she hadn't fully acknowledged. She was not defined by the actions of others, but by her own composure, clarity, and resilience. Guests continued to mingle, some sharing soft conversations about the evening's events, others quietly observing the shift in dynamics. The night had become a story, a lesson, and a memory that would linger far beyond the walls of the ballroom. Amara allowed herself a final, private smile. The night had been a test, a public display of betrayal and power, and she had emerged unscathed, stronger, wiser, and infinitely more respected. The humiliation had passed, and in its place stood the quiet authority of someone who knew her own worth, someone who understood that true triumph is often silent, deliberate, and deeply personal. The chandeliers glimmered, casting a soft light across the polished floors. The music played on, gentle and deliberate, as if acknowledging the transformation of the evening. Amara's eyes met her father's one last time. In that gaze was the acknowledgement of strategy, patience, and victory without malice. The story, for her, had reached its conclusion. She left the ballroom with a steady stride, leaving behind whispers and speculation, but carrying with her a sense of empowerment that no one could challenge. The night had belonged to her in the truest sense. She had not sought vengeance, but she had claimed dignity. She had not demanded recognition, but it had been granted. And as the doors closed behind her, the warmth of the evening settled like a quiet, enduring triumph. If you enjoyed this story and felt the tension, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves intense, gripping stories, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these unforgettable stories coming, and you won't want to miss what's next.